Hello and welcome to the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. My name is Jason Della Rosa, the sports editor here at the Herald Democrat, and we are hitting week 4 of the high school football season. Yes, we have hit 1 month of action, and for most teams, this will be the end of non-district play. People will be getting into the district games starting next week. There's a few exceptions at the 2A level. And Denison, of course, is already in district play, but for the most part, everybody else will be hitting district play starting next week. So this is the last chance to fine-tune some things, work on some things, try out some new things that maybe you want to incorporate next week, and then hopefully everybody can stay healthy or get healthy for the games that'll decide who makes the playoffs start next week. So we're going to start with the only district game again this week is Denison, and they are hosting Frisco Reedy, the defending 7-5A Division II champion, this Friday at 7 p.m. And that's the only 7 o'clock game this week. Everybody else will be at 7:30. So take note of that. Denison comes in at 2-1 and 1-0 in district play. They won last week against Frisco Lebanon Trail 40-27. They put up 525 yards of offense, 315 rushing, 210 passing. They were led by Asa Osborne in the rushing department. He had 205 yards on 37 carries. And Caleb Havener stepped in at the quarterback spot and completed 12 of 15 passes for 210 yards and 4 touchdowns. Keelan Vaughn was the main target in the passing attack. He had 8 catches for 148 yards, and he had all 4 of the touchdown catches, which ties the Denison school record for TD grabs in a game. So they're going to look to improve to 2-0 against Reedy, who went undefeated in district play last year in winning the title. They went on to the region final, and they lost a lot of seniors. They had a mostly senior lineup last year. Their quarterback this year is a junior transfer, Jalen Kitna. If that last name is familiar, it's because his dad is John Kitna, who was the former NFL quarterback and is now the current Cowboys quarterback coach. He's committed to Boston College, so he's taken over the offense. They won last week 27-21 against Lake Dallas. They're also 2-1, 1-0, and they were undefeated at this point last year, so they've taken a step back. Their scores are not as lopsided as they were last year. Reedy won this game 45-20, and it was semi-close at halftime, and then Reedy kind of blew things open in the third quarter to win going away. And like I said, they weren't really challenged when it came to district action. So this is going to be the big first test for Denison. They wanna make a statement. They should be getting back J.D. Price, the standout sophomore running back. He's missed the last 2 games with a foot injury. He's expected to play. He may be limited depending on how things go, but it's a lot better outlook for him this week for the Yellow Jackets. The Sherman Bearcats are having their homecoming this week, and they're hosting Justin Northwest. Sherman is 2-1, and Northwest is 0-3. The Bearcats played last Thursday night at the Star in Frisco, and they beat Frisco Liberty 42-14. That's their second straight win, and if they can get a win this weekend over Northwest, that will be their first 3-game win streak since 2012. So that would be a very positive note going into 7-5A Division I play next week when they take on McKinney North. Interesting to point out, Northwest 2 weeks ago played McKinney North, and that game was a wild 68-65 North win. Northwest had a chance to tie the game late, force overtime at 66-66, and North blocked the extra point and ran it back 2 points, so that's how we got that final score. So that will be interesting. Northwest obviously hasn't won a game. They lost last week 36-26 against Grapevine, but all 3 of their games have been close. They've all been within a touchdown in either the third or fourth quarter. They just haven't been able to seal a win. And last year's game against Sherman was close. It was 14-7. Northwest won in a defensive battle, and Sherman was driving to tie the game in the fourth quarter before an interception ended that streak. Now, Sherman's done very well on special teams lately, so that might be something to watch again this week. The last week against Liberty, Benji Amayabu ran back a kickoff 77 yards for a touchdown. block a punt, and then return that 6 yards for a score. So that's 3 touchdowns in 2 games by the special teams. And the offense has continued to play well. Tate Bethel continues to complete passes at a high rate. They're spreading the ball around. Mike Brown got on track the last week against Brewer, 2 weeks ago against Brewer. Last week he was doing well until he had an ankle injury in the third quarter. He could have come back in, but the game was kind of lopsided and they didn't really need him. So as a precaution, they kept him out for most of the second half. And the defense got in the scoring act last week. Daniel Amayabu picked off a pass, and as he was running it back and getting tackled, he did lose the ball, but Micah Justice was there to pick up his teammate, and he returned it the final 6 yards to score on the fumble return. So the game was only 14-7 at halftime, but Sherman was able to blow out Liberty. That's a good sign, like I said, for a team that lost the season opener against Denison, but has a chance to be 3-1 going into district play. In a district where they tied for third place and earned the 3rd seed last year. Some good confidence being built by Sherman there. The next game is Farmersville hosting Whitesboro. So Whitesboro is going to go on the road after 2 straight home losses, and they're 1-2. Farmersville is 0-3. This was a lopsided Whitesboro win in the rain last year. This was one of those Fridays last year where we had some stormy weather. And Whitesboro and Farmersville were able to get the game in, and Whitesboro came away with a 42-7 win. Farmersville's coming off a 40-3 loss against Mineola. Farmersville's allowed at least 40 points in every game so far, so that's something maybe that the Bearcat offense can get going, because they're coming off a 49-7 loss against Gunner, which obviously losing to Gunner is not anything to be ashamed of, because most of the time Gunner does come away with the win. And they avoided the shutout against the Tigers with a late touchdown by Jacob Smith. So the last 2 games against Farmersville have been fairly lopsided in Whitesboro's favor, and that's going to be something the Bearcats hopefully can hang their hat on, because they had 1 touchdown last week against Gunner. They had 1 touchdown the week before in a 21-7 loss against Aubrey. So with district play for them right around the corner, you want to kind of get to 500, get to 2-2, and feel good about how things are going when you get into district play. So if Whitesboro can go on the road and get that victory against Farmersville, I think that'll give them some positive vibes going into District 4-3A Division I action next week. Next game on the docket, Pottsboro is hosting Aubrey, and that's a game where you have Pottsboro at 3-0. And Aubrey is sitting at 1-2. Pottsboro stayed undefeated with a win 39-12 against Munster, while Aubrey dropped to 1-2 with its 48-27 loss against Pilot Point. Last year's game, Pottsboro won 34-7. So and they lead the series all time 15-4. So Pottsboro's kind of had their way with Aubrey. They've won 6 of the last 7 meetings, so that bodes well for the Cardinals, who are looking to be 4-0 for the first time since 2015 and the 4th time in the last decade. So could be another strong start to the season for Pottsboro. Last week in the win against Munster, Pottsboro jumped out to the 39-0 lead at halftime, and they kind of pumped the brakes from there, and Munster didn't score until they got a pair of touchdowns in the 4th quarter. So it was a very dominant performance, especially in the first half when you go up 39-0. Cy Shope led the way with 10 carries for 123 yards and a couple of touchdown runs. Braden Plyler, again, very efficient, 7 of 11 for 129 yards passing. He had 3 touchdown passes, and he also ran 8 times for 92 yards and a touchdown. Titus Lyons, both of his catches were for touchdowns. Ezra Fritz finished with 45 yards and a touchdown catch as the Cardinals kind of rolled and were able to cruise there in the second half. Aubrey struggled in their loss. They allowed 490 yards to Pilot Point, who is undefeated, and we'll get to them here in a little bit because they're playing one of the Texoma teams in what's going to be a really good matchup this week. But Aubrey has had its issues when it lost to Van Alstyne. in the season opener. They also gave up a lot of yards and some big plays. They were able to come back against Whitesboro 2 weeks ago and get things kind of squared away, but then it kind of went the other direction against Pilot Point. So it'll be interesting to see which Aubrey team, I guess specifically the defense, shows up, because you score 27 points, you're in a good spot, but in both of their losses, they've struggled defensively. That's the reason they're sitting at 1-2. The next game is Howe hosting Boyd. Howe is 1-2, and Boyd is 2-1. Howe is coming off an overtime loss against Bells, 19-13. While Boyd was able to get the win, they won 26-22 against Lake Worth. This game last season was a 33-7 Boyd win, and Howe is going to try to avoid entering district play with a losing record for the second time in 3 years. Last year, they entered 3-1, and unfortunately, things kind of didn't go well once they got to district, so they're going to try to turn that around either way. Both of Boyd's last 2 games have been decided by 10 points, so they're not playing in some blowouts. This is a game that might be winnable or be in the mix come the fourth quarter based on their recent trends. In the loss to Bells on Friday night for Howe, Howe was stopped on their conversion, their overtime possession, and then SNS was able to get Bells was able to get a touchdown when they had the ball on their first opportunity, and that was the difference. Howe actually came back to force the overtime. They were down 13-0 to go into the fourth quarter, and Brandon Williams had a 16-yard touchdown run on the first play of the fourth, and then Jalen Thornton returned a fumble 23 yards with a little over 3 minutes left, and that was the difference. That tied the score at 13, and Howe was able to stiffen again defensively as Bells was trying to go down and win the game in regulation. They weren't, and so that led to the overtime period. Thornton led the Bulldogs. He had 7 carries for 41 yards. Williams had 9 for 38. Leighton Elvington took over at quarterback. Austin Haley was injured during their win 2 weeks ago against SNS, and so he took over. He completed 7 to 12 passes for 76 yards. Also had an interception, and Jalen Thornton led the way receiving with 3 catches for 29 yards. So the Bulldogs will be looking to get back on track as they get ready for District 5 3A Division I action next week. Also getting ready for 5 3A Division I action next week is that district's champion, Van Alstyne. They are hosting Gainesville, and they are going to host an undefeated Gainesville team that's looked really good so far. They've already matched their win total from last year, and they won 58-8 last week against Fort Worth Castleberry. Van Alstyne's coming off a loss 35-19 against Anna, and they're sitting at 1-2. They opened with the win against Aubrey, and then they've lost 2 straight. They lost to Sunnyvale, and then they lost to Anna last week. Last year's game between these two and the recent games between the two schools have been very close. Last year, Van Alstyne won 33-31, and the Panthers stopped the late 2-point conversion to avoid going to overtime. The last 4 meetings have been all by single digits. Van Alstyne has won the last 3, so that's a good trend for them, and they're at home. Although, like I said, they've had some crazy finishes. There was the 2-point conversion stop last year. The year before that, they returned an interception, 100 yards for a score on the final play. So, if anything, you could probably expect a wild finish to this one just based on the last couple of matchups. Quarterback Zach Smith was the leading rusher last week for Van Alstyne. He ran 15 times for 95 yards, and Jake Carroll had 15 yards for 73 yards, and they had 2 touchdowns. They had 2 of the touchdowns. Smith also had a touchdown throw to Cam Montgomery to account for the Panther touchdowns. The next game on the list is Pilot Point at Gunner. So Gunner bounced back from their first regular season loss in almost 4 years. So they're sitting at 2-1. Pilot Point comes in undefeated at 3-0. And they have played really well so far this season. They're averaging 44.3 points per game. They won last week against Aubrey. The week before, they put up 60 points in a win. So this is going to be a really fun game. Gunner, obviously, we mentioned before, they won 49-7 against Whitesboro. In their last 50 games, it was the 24th time in that span that they held an opponent to single digits or less. So basically, there's been a 50-50 chance that if you go watch a Gunner, their defense was going to hold somebody under 10 points, and that includes shutouts. Last year's game was one of those shutouts. Gunner won 21-0 last year. That was one of the closer games that the Tigers had, but they were still able to win comfortably by 3 touchdowns. We mentioned that 49-7 game that Gunner won last week. It was a spread out sort of a deal. They were up 35-0 at halftime, and they were up 49-0 after the third quarter. And they did, like I said, they did it in a lot of different ways. Peyton Lowe caught a touchdown pass, and he also returned a punt 60 yards for a score. Clayton Reed returned a blocked field goal 70 yards for a score. Hudson Graham and the passing game really got going for the first time this year. He was 12 of 15 for 151 yards and 3 touchdown passes. And David Denton caught 2 of those touchdown passes, and he also returned a fumble 7 yards for a score. So a lot of different ways Gunner got some people involved, special teams, defense, and offense. And like I said, they were up big at halftime and at the end of the third quarter before Whitesboro was able to avoid the shutout. But they held the Bearcats to almost under 200 yards. So that was a nice bounce back win for them after they lost to Pottsboro 2 weeks ago. And Gunner's still ranked 5th in the state according to the Dave Campbell's 3A Division II statewide rankings. So, you know, that one blip may be their only blip, but Powell Point will be a good test before they get into District 5 3A Division II play, and a rematch with Holiday awaits there. I'm sure the Eagles are ready to get some revenge once we get there in a couple weeks. The next game on the list is SNS at Ponder. This is a matchup of 0-3 SNS visiting 1-2 Ponder. SNS is coming off a 42-28 loss against Collinsville, while Ponder lost 50-22 against Nakona. This is a series that has started the last 4 years, and Ponder's won all 3. But last year's game was close. It was 21-13. So the Rams are hoping that since they are playing better than they did last year, and so hopefully they can flip that score in their favor. The 28 points last week by SNS was the most that they had scored in a game since 2017, and a victory by Ponder this week would match its win total from last season. So you have 2 teams that really want to get a win, get some momentum going for when they get into district play. In the loss to Collinsville last week, SNS, they actually led 14-6 after the first quarter, and they were down 34-21 at halftime, but they weren't able to keep that momentum going. Although they were down 34-28 going to the fourth quarter, they just were never able to really get in a position to really tie it, and an interception return in the fourth quarter is what provided some breathing room for the Rams. So, like I said, they are playing better. They've gotten better every week. It's just a question of can they kind of break through with that first win since the 2017 season. Jake Reynolds, he ran for 2 touchdowns. Both of those came actually in the first quarter. And then Joey Baggs, he finished with 10 carries for 114 yards and a touchdown in the second quarter. And then Matt Billmeyer recovered a fumble in the end zone while the Rams were on offense actually in the third quarter. So the run game was really effective for SNS. They had over 200 yards rushing as a team. We mentioned Baggs had 114. Devin Jackson ran 14 times for 60 yards, and Reynolds had 10 for 49. So they had a 3-headed monster there, and they kept it close for a little while, and hopefully SNS is going to be able to break that losing streak that they have going. And we'll see if they can get that done against, like I said, a Ponder team that 2 of the last 3 meetings have been decided by a possession. So maybe there's a good chance, even though SNS is going on the road, that they can pull that out. We have an all-local matchup next with Bells visiting Collinsville. Bells is coming off their first win of the season. They're 1-2 with that 19-13 overtime win over Howe. And Collinsville won its second straight game with that 42-28 win against SNS that we just kind of mentioned. So they're sitting at 2-1, and they're hoping to get that to 3-1 with a win this week. This is an interesting matchup from a coaching standpoint because Bells' head coach, Dale West, was at Collinsville last year before he left to take the Bells job. So there's that storyline for this matchup. Much like last week, Collinsville's head coach, Garrett Patterson, was going against his old team in SNS and was able to get a win. So we'll see if that trend continues. To start with Bells, all three of their games have been decided by a possession. They lost to Honey Grove and Wolf City, and then the win over Howell last week. So all their games have been close. So that's obviously something to watch for there. And the Panthers have switched schemes. They're a slot T team. We mentioned in the season preview, and they're all run, and that's been evident. They did not have any passing yards last week. They only threw the ball once. They only have 39 yards for the season through the air. They ran it 63 times for 216 yards. Leading the way was freshman Grady Waldrop. He saw his first action of the season. He had 24 carries for 91 yards. And then Bo Baker had 19 carries for 61 yards and 2 touchdowns, including the game winner in overtime from 2 yards out. And Blake Rowan had 12 carries and Tyler Hawthorne had 10 carries. So you had 4 guys with double-digit carries to kind of keep that offense moving, and hopefully they can get back to 500. On the flip side, Collinsville has kind of hit their stride. They lost a close game to open the season, a game they could have won, and then they've kind of bounced back these last 2 weeks in a big way. Last week, like we mentioned, 42-28 against SNS. They had over 350 yards of offense. They were led by Trey Shelby, who had 21 carries for 172 yards and 3 touchdowns. All of his touchdowns were in the second quarter, as Collinsville scored 4 times in that frame. And then Luis Hernandez had a pair of touchdown passes to Justin Hernandez. He finished with 4 catches for 101 yards and those 2 TDs. So they were able to open things up offensively, both on the ground and through the air. And then Ja'Cory Shepard, he had the 7-yard interception return when SNS was backed up trying to go and tie the game. And he returned that for a score, and that provided some breathing room for Collinsville as they look to win their 3rd straight game. The next game on the list is Lindsay at Whitewright. Whitewright welcomes the Knights, and Whitewright is trying to continue its momentum. It is 2-1. So is Lindsay. Whitewright won last week 42-6 against Como-Picton, and Lindsay won 21-6 against Callisburg. Lindsay's a perennial playoff participant. They've made the playoffs each of the last 15 seasons, so they're usually pretty good. And last year they won this game 41-7. A victory by Whitewright would let them get their 3rd win, and they only won 2 games last year. So like I said, early season returns are good for the Tigers. And last week especially, they held an opponent to single digits for the first time since 2015. They hadn't done that in 36 games. So that was really good to see. And like I said, they won big, putting up some points. Leading the way was quarterback Marshall Mangrum. He threw for 220 yards, and he also ran for 47. In that passing, he found Aaron Pitt for 2 of the touchdowns, and also connected with Dylan Cordell and Trevor McCartney on touchdown passes. And they were all from at least 15 yards out. So these were some good throws. Cordell also added a touchdown run. He finished with 6 carries for 71 yards, and he also had 2 catches for 93 yards. So it was a big game offensively for the Tigers, defensively as well. They're going to look to try to keep that going, get to 3-1 on the season when they welcome Lindsay. It won't be easy, but things are getting better over there in Whitewright. Like I said, whenever they get that 3rd win, it's going to be an improvement over last year. And with District 9 3A Division II play around the corner, they went into the last couple of games winless a year ago, but they won 2 of their last 3 and had a chance to sneak into the playoffs. And they may already be a little bit ahead of schedule based on what they've done so far. So good things could happen there. Wolf City is at Tom Bean, and Tom Bean is sitting at 0-3, trying to get that first win of the season. Wolf City is going to come in with a 2-1 record. Tom Bean lost last week 34-26 against Maud, and Wolf City is coming off a 35-22 win against Cumbie. Wolf City's led by Dylan Wilson. He helped them pull out a win against Bells the week before that. So he's kind of the bell cow there, and so you'd expect him to get a lion's share of the carries. Tom Bean is trying to avoid an 0-4 start for the third time in 4 seasons. That's not usually, it hasn't been a predictor of district success, because they did start 0-5 one year and then won a share of the district championship. So there's not any rhyme or reason to early season struggles can carry over into district. It's 2 separate seasons. Tom Bean did score a season high in points last week against Maud. They had only had a single touchdown in the first 2 games, so that offense may be starting to click. Jesse Amberson caught a couple touchdown passes from Lance Pauler, and that they got down early and they tried to make a comeback. They had some big plays late, and if they can kind of keep that momentum going, then maybe things will turn around there for Tom Bean. It's going to be tough because Wolf City could easily be 3-0. They lost their season opener in double overtime by 2 points to Leonard. So that's a situation where Wolf City was a playoff team, has been a playoff team, and they're sitting at 2-1. They could easily be 3-0. So it won't be an easy task, but having the home field, maybe they'll be able to get something going there. And the last game on the schedule this week, Tioga is going to host Celeste. Both teams are 1-2. As we mentioned, after Tioga won their season opener against Tom Bean, they had already matched their win total. So any time Tioga takes the field, they have a chance to surpass last year's win total. They almost pulled it out last week. They lost 22-18 against Munster Sacred Heart in a game that they had a chance to pull that out, and they just weren't able to do that, while Celeste also lost a close one. They lost 20-13 against Blue Ridge. Now, Celeste had a really good season last year. They made the region semifinals, and they graduated a lot of those players. A lot of key players have gone for the Blue Devils. They've already lost as many games as they did last season. So it's a different group. It's not the group that won this game 47-0 last year. And Tioga is not really the same group that lost that game 47-0. In 3 games so far this season, Tioga scored 38 points. In their first 9 games last year, which were all losses, Tioga only scored 39 points. So their offense has much improved over last season, and through 3 games, the Bulldogs have had a different leading rusher in every game. So if you're looking at them, Caleb Scott is normally their main guy, but he's only been the leading rusher in one of those games. Ryan Montgomery led in the season opener, and Marshall Lease actually led them in rushing this last game. So they've got some weapons, they've got some options. Caleb McKinney had contributed along with Lease in the passing game. That really came alive last week for the Bulldogs. Reagan Mejia was 15 of 21, passing for 199 yards. Lease had 9 catches for 101 yards and a touchdown, and McKinney had 5 catches for 89 yards and a score. So things are getting better over there in Tioga, and like I said, if they can find a way to pull this out, get to 2-2. Like I said, we mentioned with them before, they've already clinched a playoff spot, so they just want to get better as the season goes along, get a better seed in the playoffs once they start district play in a couple weeks. They're one of those teams that has a couple more non-district games to go, and then see what opponent they get once the playoffs get there. So that's a look at week 4. First month is already about to be in the books. I know it's hard to believe. It seems like the season just started, and before we know it, we'll be in the thick of district play for everybody. And if it's not next week, it'll be after the week after that. So I appreciate you tuning in and listening to a recap of week 3, what to look for in week 4, and we'll see you next week.